Alright guys, new day, new cards, let's take a look. And I want to get started with the mage card, new mage spell called Elemental Evocation. It costs 0 mana and it is the next elemental you play this turn costs 2 less. So I think this is a reason they had to nerf Mana Worm, I'll explain why. But it's basically an innovate for mage, but it's more balanced because you can only play it with minions. It doesn't give you extra mana crystals, it just gives you a discount. And also you can only play it on elementals, so it has to go specifically into an elemental deck. Now, unfortunately, I think in my opinion, this can create some huge turn 1 plays, which I don't really like in Hearthstone, but they're probably going to be able to happen with this one, because if you imagine if you're going turn 1, if you've got this in your hand, it means you can do a 3 mana play on turn 1, so you could play something like a Nightmare Amalgam on turn 1. If you've got the coin, then you can do 4 mana, so you could play a Water Elemental on turn 1, you could play a Steam Surger on turn 1, or you could do a combination of a 1-drop and a 3-drop. So for example, if you wanted to play a Firefly, you could also play the Amalgam with it as well. So suddenly you've got these good stats on the board. And the reason why I thought that this is probably why they had to nerf Mana Worm, because although Mana Worm isn't a elemental, if you had Mana Worm in your hand, you play it turn 1, then you play Coin, Elemental Evocation, and Nightmare Amalgam, suddenly you've got a 3-3 and a 3-4 on the board that your opponent just can't answer. So of course that's going to be the best case, maybe it won't happen too often, but I don't like those sort of situations in Hearthstone, because if you're playing against it, it's almost as if you shouldn't have started the game, because there's very few classes that will be able to recover from that sort of turn 1 or turn 2 play. It's just crazy, really. And you don't even have to play it all in the first turn. Say you wanted to make use of the elemental synergies, you could just play Firefly on turn 1, and then turn 2 you just play Elemental Evocation and Steam Surger, for example, and then you get that synergy from getting the Battle Cry. Now, there are some downsides to the card, of course. Elemental decks don't usually want to run too many spells. They're a minion-based deck. Book of Spectres is a key reason for that. If you play Book of Spectres and you draw spells, they get discarded. So you don't really want too many spells in your deck, because you want minions and you want to be playing them on the board and gaining your power that way. The spells are usually generated from your hand with the Spellstone, for example. So this kind of works against Book of Spectres. Also, when you draw it, because it's not a minion, it's not something you can play onto the board. But the way it works is that you can impact the board earlier. So you can kind of smoothen out your curve or get an increased curve, and you can play some big tempo plays. Is it worthwhile playing with much later elementals? Yes, I think sometimes it's difficult to get the elemental synergy when you've got bigger elementals in your hand. Maybe you're trying to set up a Blaze Caller, but you've played Frostless Jaina, you haven't actually played any elementals onto the board. So you could play Elemental Evocation, then play a 2-drop, which then activates your Blaze Caller for the next turn. So that opens up those kind of possibilities. So I'm completely undecided on this card. This will either be completely broken and OP by causing some really, really strong early plays, or it just won't be put into decks because later on in the game it doesn't have enough value. Next, I want to talk about an epic shaman spell called Big Bad Voodoo. It costs 2 mana, and what it does is give a friendly minion death rattle, summon a random minion that costs 1 more. So instantly you can compare this to Ancestral Spirit, which is a spell already in Shaman, and that just resummons the same minion that you play the card on. Now, this card, what it does is actually resummon a minion but upgrades it by 1 mana. So you could think, well, wow, great, you're getting an extra mana cost minion, so that's great value. But actually, I think that this card is worse than Ancestral Spirit, because it gives you a random minion that costs 1 more. So let's say you played a Lich King onto the board, you play Big Bad Voodoo on it, and then next turn, when your opponent kills it, you resummon Master Oakheart, for example, which is just a 5/5. It's not really as good as playing Ancestral Spirit on your Lich King, resummoning another Lich King, and then getting the benefit of generating more value from the Lich King cards. And also, Ancestral Spirit works really well on big taunt minions, because it helps you to protect your hero, because your opponent will have to kill that taunt minion twice. If you're getting a random minion, you're not going to get that taunt effect a lot of the time. So yes, you could play this and get some fantastic value out of it. It could summon something better. But ultimately, I think it's just better to play Ancestral Spirit and resummon a card that you specifically want. Next up, we've got Emberscale Drink, which is another dragon. This time it's just for the warrior class. A rare card that costs 5 mana, 5 attack, 5 health, and it has a battle cry: if you're holding a dragon, gain 5 armor. So this card can be compared to Shield Maiden, which actually rotated out of the game. That was a 6 mana card and had a battle cry of always gaining 5 armor. This has a condition that you do have to have a dragon in your hand. So you're only going to play this in a dragon deck, and if you are playing a dragon deck, you're more than likely going to have a dragon in your hand. There will be instances where you don't, and then this is just a standard 5 mana 5/5 play. Now this card's a little bit strange for a dragon because usually dragons are kind of mid-range or tempo decks. This, however, seems to fit into a control deck where you're gaining armor. Yes, warrior has a lot of good synergies, such as shield slam. You could say this is a good way to curve into heavy metal on turn 6, the new spell that summons a minion equal to your armor. So it could work quite well with that. I don't really see heavy metal as a good card right now, though, to be honest. Pretty cool. Let's see what the other dragons are like before we make any assumptions on the dragon decks. Next we have the Blood Scalp Strategist. This is a 3 mana 2/4 card, so the stats are a little bit on the weak side, but it has a very good battle cry. If you have a weapon equipped, discover a spell. Now, discovering a spell is always excellent. Hunter spells are generally on the lower cost side, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You could be discovering secrets to synergize with your spell stones, or you could be discovering, say, something that's a 4 mana play to play on your next turn, like a flanking strike. Also important to note that this costs 3 mana, so if you have played Candle Shot on turn 1, you should still have it up and available to be able to play and synergize with this card. Of course, if your opponent hasn't oozed it by then. But other than Candle Shot, I think Eagle Horn Bow is the only other weapon in Hunter right now that would work. Rock Delar doesn't work with this card because this is a minion. Candle Shot is a good synergizer with this, as I mentioned, but I'm not really sure what kind of deck will have this right now because it doesn't go into Spell Hunter, it doesn't go into Death Rattle Hunter, it doesn't go into Mid-Range Hunter, although it could do. I don't think so, because at that stage in the game, that's when you want to be playing your beasts and playing on those beast synergies. So it does generate some value, but it's not really the sort of card that we usually see in Hunter. So I'll be interested to see if it sees play. In other classes, this would be much stronger, I think. But we'll see. We'll see what other Hunter cards come out. And next we have the Sightless Ranger. This one is a 5 mana 3/4 minion with Rush. And it has Overkill summon 2 1/1 bats. So this card is a little bit difficult to decide, because in certain situations it can be excellent, and in other situations pretty useless, because if you're playing this on turn 5, a 3/4 minion could possibly just die, and then you're only doing 3 damage. It might not even trade in. But there are certain instances which are quite common where it would be very good. For example, if your opponent played a chain gang, if they played a chain gang, this can rush, kill one of the chain gangs, and summon 2 1/1 bats. If they don't then trade into your Sightless Ranger the next turn, you could then kill the other chain gang and then summon another 2 1/1 bats. So if you're getting the Overkill to activate once, you're playing a 5 mana 6/5, 6 health 5 attack with Rush, with Rush for 3 attack of it. So it's kind of okay with those stats. Problem is, and it'd be very good against Paladin decks, Odd Paladin for example, might work quite well against Zoo, but against control decks, combo decks, spell decks, I think it's pretty useless. So I'm not really sure how much of this one will see play. It depends on the meta, because it could work quite well against token or aggro decks. Lastly, let's look at the new legendary for Rogue. This one is called Captain Hooktusk, a pirate. Costs 8 mana, has 6 attack and 3 health, and the battle cry is summon 3 pirates from your deck and give them Rush. So this card is clearly specified for a pirate deck. There's no point playing this unless you're playing a pirate deck, but the effect is actually very powerful. It does cost 8 mana, so it's quite expensive. Drawing 3 pirates means that they're likely to be lower cost minions, because pirates usually are. You're not going to be pulling out any big minions with this. But one of the main problems I've talked about before on pirate decks is that they struggle, or aggressive decks, is they struggle with card draw. And if you don't kill your opponent early enough, then you're struggling to top deck, and then the top deck cards you get are just kind of weaker minions because they're usually lower cost. Well, this is another way to draw minions out of your deck, play them onto the board, and kind of swarm your opponent, which is exactly what pirates want to do. Also an even cost card, which is really interesting because it seems like Blizzard is kind of pushing an even rogue pirate deck. That could be potentially quite good. There are a number of new cards that would support that. But unfortunately, what it does mean is you have to kind of play the pirate deck without the South Sea Captain. And the South Sea Captain has been a staple of pirate decks for a long time. So would you really want to play this deck without that? I'm not so sure. The 1-mana hero power would be very positive in a pirate deck though. Now the main target you're going to be wanting to hit with this is actually the Ticket Scalper. I talked about when I was looking at the Ticket Scalper in a previous review was that if it had Rush it could be really good because it's got a very high attack and it's easier to get the Overkill effect to activate. Well, if you're playing Captain Hooktusk, then and you get a Ticket Scalper, you could even get 2 Ticket Scalpers out, then you could overkill potentially on 2 minions and draw 4 cards. So that is a really strong, powerful play. But actually, in reality, most of your pirates aren't going to be that good to come out as rush minions. They'll likely die with the trades you're trying to make. They can't go face, which is what you really want to do. I think this card would be a little bit broken if they could go face, so that's a good thing. But I think it leaves too many opportunities for your opponent to do a board clear. Captain Hooktusk itself has only got 3 health, so when you play this, you get out a bunch of pirates on the board. They can't actually impact your opponent's health total, and then suddenly, if your opponent's got a board clear, you're in big trouble. They can quite easily clear all the pirate minions with the board clear, but of course that's always a risk when you're playing a pirate deck. So we'll see. It really depends on the strength of a pirate rogue deck. If pirate rogue isn't a thing, no one's ever going to play this because there's no point. And if it is, then I think you would put it into the deck. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment, let me know what you think about the cards, and I'll see you in the next one.